soil type plays a significant role in how often and for how long we need to irrigate our soils. We recently looked at the composition of soil and how these affect water holding capacity. Soils are composed of different proportions of sand, clay, and silt particles that all mix together to create our soil matrix. And these different particles have different sized pore spaces to allow water to move through. Soils in general are composed of about 50% of these mineral complexes and 50% pore space. And that pore space is where air moves into the soil to bring oxygen to the plant roots, and it's also where water moves into the soil. So the size of these pore spaces is going to have a significant effect on how water moves through that soil. I have a few examples of different size pores so that we can illustrate this. Starting with just a mixture of rocks, these have the largest pore spaces. And when we add water, we can see that it moves very quickly down through those large pores and settles into the bottom of our container. Sand has smaller pores than the rocks, but compared to most soil mixtures, it has fairly large pore spaces. And when we irrigate sand, the water will spread out a little bit through the layers of sand, but it also moves fairly quickly down through those layers to our subsurface soils. This is a simple potting mixture of soil that would represent a nice loamy soil. And when we irrigate in this, the water's going to again spread out fairly well through those layers and move a little bit slower down to the bottom than what we see with a pure sand mixture. If we have a heavier soil like a clay, that infiltration rate is going to be even slower, and what we tend to find is the water fans out a little bit more over the surface. So of course this is going to influence how we irrigate that soil. A few other factors that we want to think about are what type of cover is on that surface, whether it's plants, mulch, or just leaf litter, the slope of a site, and also compaction. When we have a compacted soil like we have here, we have a real hard layer that's fairly impenetrable to water. And when it rains or if we irrigate, the water tends to pool on that surface and run off. It's very hard for it to infiltrate into those pore spaces because it's so compressed. The same thing happens when we have a fully saturated soil after a rain or irrigation. If we add additional water to that saturated soil, the pore space is already full of water, so that new irrigation water won't be able to move in to the soil. In both of these cases, we tend to see a large amount of water running off the surface, down slopes, into drains, or into our creeks and rivers. When irrigating the landscape, we want to apply water only as quickly as it'll move into the soil. We recently experienced a heavy rainfall event where we had over 1.5 inches of water in an hour, and you can see very clearly from that what happens when we apply water too quickly. It washes off the soil surface because it can't penetrate into the pore spaces quick enough. What we end up is wasting water if we're irrigating. Our topsoil washes away. Here you can see how the mulch also was carried away because the water just came too quickly. So when we irrigate, we want to apply that water at a slower rate. Now, if you have a heavy clay soil that just doesn't take water quickly, we have a few ways to get around that problem. One is to build a small circle of elevated soil around our trees and shrubs. We refer to this as a donut because it's low in the middle but high along the edges. And what this does is create a little area for water to pool as it infiltrates slowly into the soil. Of course, another solution is to use a drip irrigation system, which releases water at a slower rate. In addition to affecting the rate of irrigation, soil type also influences how often we need to irrigate our soils. Just as a sandy soil allows water to penetrate more quickly, it also allows water to move more quickly through and out of that soil. Whereas a clay soil with smaller pores, water stays in that soil for a little bit longer period of time. Because of this, we have to irrigate our sandy soils more often than our clay soils. Now, even when we have an irrigation system, we need to make sure we're adjusting for soil type. One common problem with irrigation is people tend to run it every day at a very regularly scheduled time. And what this does is create a nice moist layer at the surface of the soil, and it encourages the roots of our plants to grow very shallowly. And they can't tolerate drier, hotter conditions that we experience later in the summer. A better solution is to water less often, perhaps just 2 times a week, but to a more deeper level so that we're saturating a deeper portion of that soil. Even in a single residential landscape, soil type can vary significantly from one area to the other. You want to sample those soils in various places throughout your landscape and adjust your irrigation practices for those localized conditions.